Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Blake here from ChessPathways.com, and in today's openings video, we'll be talking about the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian defense. The Najdorf is one of the most popular and aggressive options in the Sicilian, so let's take a look at how the game begins. White plays e4 and black plays c5, we get a Sicilian defense. White opts for the open Sicilian with knight f3 intending d4. Black can play many moves here, but d6 is the move they choose in the Najdorf. d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6 to attack the pawn, knight c3 to defend the pawn, and now the Najdorf is characterized by this move a6 here from black. In the description, I'll put a link to my video on the Sicilian defense in general in case you want more background on these first 5 moves, but this is going to be our starting position when we're talking about the Najdorf. So what's black's idea here? Why does black play this move a6? We're often taught in the opening that you always need to be developing your pieces as fast as possible and controlling space in the center, and that you don't want to waste time with moves such as a6. And this is generally true, but black has some ideas here. Not only does this take away the b5 square from all the white pieces, but in a lot of lines, black is going to want to expand on the queen side very quickly. Black can play b5 in some lines, intending b4 to drive this knight away, intending to put a bishop on b7 to attack this e4 pawn. The rook will often come here to the c-file, and black is going to try to build up some pressure there on the queen side. We know that in the open Sicilian that white usually gets a lead in development and a space advantage for the time being, and that's certainly true here. We see that both white bishops have open lines, whereas that's not the case for black. We see that white has a pawn here in the center and black does not, but the black position is very solid, black has no weaknesses, and black has some long-term pluses they can count on too, such as the fact that they have 2 central pawns remaining compared to white's 1. Alright, let's take a look at how the game can go from here. Both players have tons of options available in the Najdorf. It's probably one of the most complex openings in all of chess, but we can take a look at some of the main lines today. One of white's main options is called the English attack, where white is going to try to castle queenside and then launch a pawn storm here on the king side, especially if black castles that way. And this can lead to some extremely exciting chess. So let's take a look at one of the main lines here. White can play bishop e3, just intending queen d2 and long castling. And black could play knight g4 to harass that bishop. Black could play a setup with e6. One of the main lines goes e5, and now knight back to b3. Bishop e6. White can play f3, which is a great multi-purpose move. Not only does it prevent knight to g4 and add protection here to the e-pawn, but this will also serve as the launching point for white's kingside pawn storm, making sure that g4 is also under control. Black can play bishop to e7, queen to d2, castle, castle, knight b to d7, and now things can get very exciting with this opposite side castling race to the king. g4, b5, g5, b4. This is one of the main lines. Knight to e2, knight to e8, f4, a5, f5, and a4. And this is not just some crazy line that never happens in real games. I've actually played this position from the white side probably 4 or 5 times now in tournament chess. Of course, both sides have many options to deviate from this too. There's plenty of alternatives at many different points along this huge 15-move line. But I like showing this position because it really illustrates the idea of the English attack very well. White's going all out here on the king side, and black is going as fast as they can with their queenside counterplay towards the white king as well. Just to show one alternative, in this position here after white plays queen to d2, instead of castling, black will sometimes play here h5, just trying to really slow white down from playing this pawn storm on the king side. Of course, this is kind of double-edged because now black's king is going to be less secure if it castles over here, but black can often keep their king in the center for a while. It's not really too vulnerable here, and just simply start getting their play going on the queen side. Alright, we've looked at the English attack with bishop e3. One of white's other very popular moves is to play bishop g5. And this also very often has some very aggressive intentions behind it. White can follow up with f4, possibly queen to f3, really trying to blow things open here in the center before black catches up in development. So let's see how the game can go. Black will often respond with e6. You could choose an e5 setup, but it's considered more dangerous against bishop g5 setups from white, because this knight's going to be pinned to that queen, and you might have to watch out for knight d5 at some point, hopping in here to the d5 square, because that knight's pinned. So e6, f4, and now black has a couple options. I pulled one line here where black can just play bishop e7, just breaking that pin, reinforcing that knight, possibly getting ready to castle here. and now white can play queen to f3, queen to c7. This is very common in the Sicilian to get on this c file. We see how useful this move a6 is. Black does not have to worry about any knight b5 ideas just yet, and black can try to pry this c file open later by playing b5, b4, and getting to this c2 pawn if white's not careful. White can castle long. Black can play knight b to d7, just developing another piece, and now white will very often play g4 here, again being very aggressive here on the king side, trying to make something happen. Black can play b5, and now this bishop on g5 is kind of in the way of white's pawn storm. That's one disadvantage to having it here instead of on e3, so white will often just trade it off, trying to go as fast as possible, clearing that g5 square for a pawn. After knight takes f6, g5, the knight has to go back. White can play f5, and this is a pawn sacrifice, of course. The g5 pawn is hanging, but very often in the Sicilian, white's not too concerned about sacrificing a pawn if they have to. They want to make something happen there, open up lines as fast as possible to capitalize on their lead and development. So bishop takes g5 check. That's no concern for white. They can just play king to b1. Black does get this nice outpost here on e5 for the knight, but after queen to h5, it's kind of hard to see how black can deal with some of these threats here. This pawn is pinned, and that means that f takes e6 is going to be a big threat. And of course, not to mention, this bishop is also now under attack. And again, this is a very long, very complex 15-move line, but again, it's not some obscure line that never happens. This has been played hundreds of times in tournament chess by players of all sorts of different levels, going up to the grandmaster level. But of course, both sides have many alternatives along the way, and I'm going to show at least one here. After white plays f4 here on move 7, we looked at black simply playing bishop e7. One of black's main alternatives is to play queen b6 and try to exploit the fact that this bishop is missing from the c1 square and this b2 pawn is hanging. And it's really not so easy to see how white can defend this pawn. b3 would be extremely weakening of the queen side, especially if white wanted to castle that way later. Rook b1, again, precludes queenside castling. Queen c1, of course, is not possible because the knight is hanging, and knight b3 to defend the pawn could even be met by queen to e3 check. So it looks very hard for white to defend this b2 pawn. But as we know, it can be dangerous to go on a pawn-grabbing adventure with your queen before you finish up development. And that's why this line is often called the poison pawn variation. Black is going to win a pawn, but white is going to get an even bigger lead in development for it. So let's take a look. White can play here queen to d2, just making sure this knight is defended so that if this queen takes on b2, white can play rook to b1 safely. Queen takes b2, rook b1, queen a3, and again, white tries to open lines as fast as they can by playing f5. Meeting this with e5 to try to keep the lines closed looks very dangerous for black. That would give up control of the d5 square. This bishop could just exchange off for this knight, and now white's hopping into d5 very soon. So usually black will just keep developing, knight to c6, f takes c6, f takes e6, knight takes c6, b takes c6, and now white has a very nice pawn sacrifice here, e5. This is a very common sacrifice in this pawn structure. It really just tears the black pawns apart here because black cannot meet this with d5 because their knight is under attack. So they really have to accept this pawn sacrifice, and now black's up 2 pawns for the time being, but look at all the black pawns, they're all isolated here. And white still has a big lead in development, and this king could be exposed here in the center. After bishop takes f6, g takes f6, knight e4. White has many threats here already. This f6 pawn is hanging, this diagonal is now exposed to the king, and black has tried a couple different moves here. Bishop e7 is the main move, but sometimes even the greedy queen takes a2 has been played, just grabbing a third pawn and attacking the rook. Again, some very complex double-edged stuff here, which is why a lot of people love the Najdorf. But then again, I would not recommend playing the Najdorf unless you're really willing to put in the time to learn some of these lines, because it's very easy to go wrong and lose quickly if you're not careful. So we've taken a look at 2 very aggressive options for white, bishop e3 and bishop to g5. Now let's take a look at what happens if white chooses a more positional approach. Bishop e2 is another very popular move against the Najdorf, and often when white plays this, they're simply intending to castle short and play a positional game. This move's a good developing move, and it also takes away the g4 square from the black knight for the time being. Black can play e5, knight to b3, bishop e7, and both players can simply castle short here to the king side. Bishop e3 is one of white's main moves, just developing a piece. Black can put this bishop on e6. We've seen this bishop come to e6 a lot. It does sometimes come to b7. I think that's more associated with setups involving the pawns on e6 and d6, though. A lot of times if black does put that pawn on e5, then the e6 becomes a very good square for this bishop. Queen to d2, knight to d7, and now white can play a4. White did not castle queenside, so they're more free to move their queenside pawns, and white knows that black would like to play b5 at some point and start trying to expand on the queenside, so white simply prevents this by playing a4. Black could have played b5 earlier, but oftentimes it's dangerous for black to play that too quickly because it can help white open up lines before black finishes development. Let's go ahead and take a look at one example of that. For example, here after bishop e2, black could play b5 right away, but if black does this without much development behind it, white can play a4 here, threaten to open lines right away and force this pawn to do something. Looks like b4 is the natural move, but now knight to d5 can be played, and this pawn can be a target early on. White can attack it with tempo. Black can never really play a5 to defend the pawn because now the b5 square is free for all the white pieces, and white already has a big lead in development. This pawn could be a target to open the c file very quickly by playing c3 in some cases, so black has to be careful about playing b5 too fast. So that's why black was delaying it, that's why black waited till he got castled, but of course that gave white the opportunity here to play a4 and stop b5 altogether. So in this line, rook c8 can be played, that's very common getting on that c file. a5, this is a very nice pawn structure here for white on the queen side, they kind of have one pawn freezing two. Queen to c7, rook f to d1, and a lot of the positional battles here in the Najdorf are going to revolve around this d6 pawn and the d5 square. This d6 pawn is a backwards pawn. It's a pawn on an open file for white that cannot move forward very easily, and that means it could be a target, but the good news here for black is that this e7 bishop is a very good defender of this pawn, and it's not at all going to be easy for white to win this pawn. If black can ever succeed in playing d5 safely, that will often be very good news here for black. We see that black's long-term advantage of two central pawns against one would have really come to life in that instance. d4 would be a threat to fork some white pieces, or even just grab a space advantage, and that would be good news for black, but again, that's going to be very hard to achieve. White has some very good control here over that d5 square. So rook f to d8 is one of the main moves, just adding more support to this pawn. Queen to e1 can be played. This just helps make sure that this rook is not lined up with that queen. There's not going to be any tactics there. And in some cases, this queen could even swing out to the king side in some lines, although it's not too common here, I don't think. Black could play here h6, h3. Again, much more positional, slower play here, just depriving the enemy of some squares here. Queen to c6. Black's really starting to add some support here to try to get this d5 break in. White's in time to play bishop f3 and clamp down on that d5 square more. And now black will often play knight to h7, possibly intending to play the f5 pawn break instead. If d5 is not possible, black reasons, they might as well play f5, and again, try to tear down the sole white pawn here in the center and get a space advantage here for black. Of course, that would have to be carefully arranged. You don't want to open this bishop's lineup after e takes f5 and let that bishop attack the queen. This knight could also hop into g5 in some cases, trying to either win black the bishop pair, or force this bishop to retreat, or even just add more pressure here to the e4 pawn. Alright, we've covered a lot of the main options here, bishop e3, bishop g5, and bishop e2. I just wanted to come back here and briefly mention some alternatives in case you wanted to look into this yourself. Bishop c4 is another popular move. It's not as popular because it does allow black to play b5 with tempo in some lines, and this bishop can be blunted with e6. But black does have to be careful. This bishop does take aim at this f7 pawn, and can be an instrumental part of the attack if black's not ready to deal with it. So that's one option. This move h3 has become trendy in recent years. White's just intending a very fast g4 without the support here of the f pawn on f3, and this could allow the f pawn to come to f4 in one move. This could allow the queen to come to f3 in some lines. I know there's been some very high-profile games in recent years involving 6h3. And let's see, white has a couple other options here going back after a6. White has tried g3, just fianchettoing this bishop. White has tried a4 right away, just making sure b5 is impossible. Both sides certainly have a lot of options open to them in the Najdorf Sicilian. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. And please make sure you click that link down in the description to visit chesspathways.com and get signed up there. It's totally free, only takes 5 seconds, and all you need is an email address. And when you sign up, I'll send you a free move-by-move guide to chess thinking. It took me way too long to become a chess master, so I'm hoping to help you do it in a fraction of the time. Thanks, and I'll see you there.